How do I look?
Very good.
From international superstar to world-class humanitarian, Audrey Hepburn became a symbol of style and class, gracing everything she touched.
She sure was a hell of a good actress. She sure knew what the hell she was doing. And she sure was something special.
A veteran of only 27 films, she is one of the most recognized and best-loved women in the world.
She was love and humor and grace and open and knowing and perfect. She was perfect.
I've had the opportunity to see how deep her soul is and its commitment to life. And the love that the woman exudes is just absolutely fathomless.
Audrey Hepburn was born in Brussels, Belgium on May 4th, 1929. The name on her birth certificate read Audrey Kathleen Ruston, although most people knew her by her baptismal name, Edda van Heemstra Hepburn Ruston. Her mother, the Baroness Ella van Heemstra, was already a divorcee and raising two sons when she met and married Audrey's father, Joseph Hepburn Ruston, an Anglo-Irish businessman with a penchant for easy living.
Her father was a banker of some sort. He was more like a wheeler dealer. But her mother was a member of the Dutch aristocracy. So financially, they were certainly better off than most people. Not all the nobility by any means were wealthy, but they did have several residences. But they fought constantly about a lot of things, money in particular.
To avoid her parents' incessant arguing, Audrey spent most of her time with nannies or with her half-brothers, Ian and Alexander.
Her childhood was not lonely because she had her two brothers, whom she adored, and she was a tomboy.
By 1934, Audrey's father became enamored of conservative, pro-German propaganda. And although the Baroness tolerated her husband's politics, she felt her daughter would be better off away from home. At the tender age of 5, young Audrey was packed up and sent to a fashionable boarding school.
From a very early age, she was always rather shy and withdrawn and introspective, and it had gotten to the point where her mother was worried about her. So her mother sent her to a boarding school in England as shock therapy. Those were Audrey's words of description, and it evidently worked.
Audrey blossomed at her new school. Here she learned English and showed a talent for dance. But tensions at home were growing, and by 1938, the Baroness and Joseph divorced. From that time on, Audrey would rarely see her father.
Her father left the family, abandoned them completely. This was one of the worst events of her life and one of the most defining moments of her life in a very negative way. It always left her with an insecurity, which she herself spoke of frequently.
In 1939, as the war in Europe escalated, the Baroness insisted Audrey join her in Arnhem, Holland, where she and her sons had relocated. But no country in Europe was safe from Hitler's tyranny. On May 5th, 1940, Nazi troops rolled through the streets of Arnhem, heralding the ominous onset of occupation.
One brother went into hiding just before he was forcibly inducted into German service, and her other brother was inducted and taken to a forced labor situation in Germany.
Audrey's mother during the war years was quite incredible, first of all because of the amount of work that she did, but also in the way that she looked after Audrey. She made certain that she availed herself of whatever food there was to feed Audrey, even managed to get her some ballet lessons.
Faced with deprivation and the growing horrors of war, Audrey threw herself more and more into the glamorous and rigorous world of dance. Before long, she was allowed to study and perform at the Arnhem Conservatory of Music.
They did have what they called blackout performances, which were wonderful. They would be performed in someone's basement privately to raise a little money for the resistance. And you weren't allowed to applaud at the end because it would have alerted the Germans. And Audrey once said that her favorite audiences in the world in her life were the ones who never made a sound when she finished a performance.
As Holland suffered under the scourge of Nazi occupation, Audrey did what she could to help the Allied resistance whenever possible.
Audrey was involved a little bit, which would have been that she took messages occasionally to people. The kids could keep them in their shoes. They could have a lot more mobility than the adults.
On September 17th, 1944, the Allied powers attempted to liberate Holland and swooped down on Arnhem in Operation Market Garden. Audrey and her mother now found themselves in the midst of the biggest combined air-land offensive of the war.
The Battle of Arnhem is even more astounding. This is a tiny backwater little town, and in 1944, it turned into the site of the single greatest Allied disaster of the entire war. And Audrey not only lived there, but watched it.
The Van Heemstra home was bombed to the ground, and the Nazis forced the entire city to retreat. Food, always in short supply, now became impossible to find. The Dutch grimly referred to the time as their hunger winter.
Life was extremely difficult for them under those circumstances. No food at all. They were reduced to eating tulip bulbs and cooked grass.
For Audrey, adolescence had been overshadowed by the struggle for survival. Finally, on the day after her 16th birthday, she was granted the greatest gift she could imagine. On May 5th, 1945, Germany surrendered to the Allied forces. The war was at last over. Within days, food and emergency supplies began pouring in from the United Nations Relief Fund, known as UNRWA, the forerunner of UNICEF. Within weeks, Audrey's brothers returned home, and her family and the world joined together in a long overdue reunion.
After the war, Arnhem was completely devastated, in ruins. There was no future for them there. They had to leave.
In 1948, Audrey and her mother relocated to bustling post-war London, where Audrey was to study on a ballet scholarship. Dropping her Dutch surnames, Audrey Edda van Heemstra Hepburn Ruston would be known simply as Audrey Hepburn. But at 19 years old, the struggling 5'7" dance student was devastated to learn that she was by now too tall and too old to ever be a prima ballerina.
Ballet is what gave her discipline. Of course, when she went to England, it wasn't just dedication to the ballet and to work. There was the need to work in order to sustain herself. Both she and her mother worked at whatever jobs they could find.
Utilizing her dance training, Audrey settled for work as a chorus girl and quickly found employment in several West End shows and nightclubs. She became a favorite at Ciro's, not so much for her dancing, but for her infectious spirit.
What people seemed to like about her the most was the eyes. The eyes always got everybody. But also she had an openness and an ease about herself that people found not just lovely to look at, but charming as a character trait.
While working at Ciro's, Audrey caught the attention of casting directors and fashion photographers alike, eventually gaining her bit parts in British films like The Secret People and The Lavender Hill Mob.
She saw it as pure luck, of course, that she could not understand why people wanted her to be in the films and what they thought was so special about her, so she made up for it by working extra hard.
In 1951, stardom was the last thing on Audrey's mind when she was invited to France for a leading role in a charming but otherwise forgettable film called Monte Carlo Baby.
But I'm only a baby. Baby? Poulos, I refuse to utter such miserable drivel.
What?
You know what you can do with your precious picture. Bury it in a lonely place.
Melissa.
While there, on the set, Colette, the great French writer who had just written a play, spotted Audrey just standing in the background waiting for a scene to be shot and said, "Voila, there's my Gigi."
Gigi was scheduled to open in New York, and the part of Colette's young French courtesan demanded a unique blend of innocence and sex appeal, an abundance of which Colette felt Audrey embodied. The inexperienced actress, however, was not so sure.
Because she had no training, she hadn't really prepared herself for the success. She didn't feel that she warranted it.
Audrey Hepburn was a dancer. That's what she wanted to do. That's what she was trained to do. That's really what her goal was in life. She became an actress by accident.
At the age of 22, Audrey Hepburn boarded the Queen Mary, bound for America. The former dancer who had overcome the perils of World War II was about to launch a full-scale assault on Broadway. On October 3rd, 1951, New York City was ripe with excitement. Death of a Salesman was a hit on Broadway. The New York Giants were about to win the pennant race. And an unknown actress was about to debut in a French comedy at the Fulton Theater.
She hadn't had an acting lesson. Now she was supposed to take the lead in a major Broadway play. She had a quote that she made to the newspapers, which was, "Now all I have to do is learn how to act."
After 6 weeks of rigorous rehearsals, Gigi opened on schedule and to rapturous reviews. Audrey Hepburn's debut became the talk of the town, and Hollywood began to take notice.